Let's look at other things we can do with filters. Sometimes I want to really exaggerate the detail in an image, really get the detail to pop out. And I can do that sometimes through sharpening, but sometimes I want it to just look different and have a different feel. So in order to do that, here's a technique you can use. If I duplicate a layer, I'm going to do that by typing Command J, I can then apply a filter. And the filter I'm going to use is called high pass. When I do high pass, look at what we end up getting. If I bring this setting called radius all the way down, that is exactly 50% gray throughout the entire picture. But then when I start bringing it up, you start seeing some detail showing up. But still, the majority of the image is 50% gray. Well, I don't know if you remember when we applied texture to an image. We used some blending modes. And I described how a certain category of blending modes worked by saying that 50% gray goes away. And anything brighter than 50% gray would brighten my picture. Anything darker than 50% gray would darken my picture. And so if we use one of those blending modes, we can get this to apply to my picture. And do you see these little details? Any of the areas of detail are where we have little areas of brightness. And so let's see what it can look like. I'm just going to set it to overlay mode. Now if I turn off this layer, you'll see what it looks like without it. And then I'll turn it back on, you'll see what it looks like with it. Can you see a difference in the detail? The only thing is, it was hard to judge what setting to use when I was in overlay because I wasn't looking at this end result. And it looks to me like I can get away with being more aggressive in that filter had I been looking at this end result. So let's do it one more time where I can actually see it at the time that I'm applying it. Throw this away. So here's what I do. I duplicate the layer. I set it to overlay mode now, before applying the filter. But that's going to make the picture look weird because right now this layer does not primarily contain 50% gray, which would go away. Instead it contains all this, so it's going to look weird. But it's only going to look weird for a moment until I get over here to the choice called high pass. And then it'll go back to looking normal. If I bring this radius all the way down, it will look completely normal. No change happening whatsoever. And as I bring it up, I can see the exaggerated detail coming in. And I can see if I go too high that it just starts looking weird. So I can more easily judge what I'm getting there. And if I want hyper detail, I can duplicate this layer that already has high pass applied. And so here's what it looks like with hyper detail. If I turn off these two layers, there's the original, and turn them back on, and there's our end result. You see? Now that's hyper detail. What I was going for there is more where it might even look like a painting. You know how some hyper-realistic painters would go in and paint like detail it looks like you wouldn't even see in a photo? But if I want something that looks hyper-detailed, oftentimes using high pass will end up giving me a lot of that. In this case, I did a double pass and did it really strong, so it is more obvious than you would want to have on a lot of images. But usually the grungier the image is, meaning the more mega detail there is in the image, the more appropriate this technique is. So duplicate layer, overlay mode, high pass filter. Then sometimes I just want to make something where it doesn't quite look like a photograph. I want it to look more like a piece of art, something that looks like a painting, looks like a drawing, or just looks like something other than a photo. And if that's the case, I might experiment with something called the filter gallery. If I go to the filter gallery, it shows me my image on the left. It just happened to zoom up to 100%, but the whole image is there. You can zoom out using standard keyboard shortcuts, or there's a plus and minus button in the lower left. And then there's a list of categories over here. I can say I want something to do with texture applied. I want to do something that stylizes or whatever, but I'm going to stick with the artistic ones. And I'm going to choose one of these. In this case, I'm going to go with dry brush. And on the right side, once I've chosen the effect that I want, over here, it lets me modify the settings. And for now, I'm only looking at the sky. I'm going to adjust this and see if I can get it where I like the sky. I'm already rather liking it because it looks kind of painterly. I just might want a little less detail in there. Okay, and see if I want any texture. Nah, I like it without. Okay, or anyway, I like the way these clouds are starting to look because they remind me of more of a painting, like when I put things in. And so what I'm going to do is then scroll down though, and when I look at the bottom though, the bottom is too simple. This down here, I need more detail down there. The clouds look great like this, but it's the bottom where I want something different. So let me show you a different way of applying this and then show you how we can choose different settings and very easily change them. I'll click cancel for now, or actually I'll click OK, hoping it might remember these settings because I like them. And then I can always choose undo here to get rid of it. I'm going to turn this layer into something called a smart object. To turn it into a smart object, you go to the filter menu, and there's a choice called convert for smart filters. Convert for smart filters. Because usually when you apply a filter, the filter is generally permanent. And if you save and close your image, there's no way to get back the original. But if you first choose that choice, convert for smart filters, something's going to happen to your layer. If you look in the layers panel, watch this thumbnail. When I come over here and choose convert for smart filters, watch the thumbnail in the layers panel. Do you see a little icon that just appeared on it? That's your indication that you've done something different. That means this layer is a smart object. What's a smart object? A smart object is like taking what used to be in that layer and sliding it into a Ziploc bag and sealing the bag shut. It's in a protective thing that happens to be called a smart object. And now whatever I do to that layer cannot penetrate that protective Ziploc bag to permanently change what's inside. Instead, whatever I do to it is just added like as an accessory to the bag. It's as if I took the bag and I did something to make it diffused or to make it something where it's frosted on the outside. And that's changing my view of what's inside, but not actually changing the contents that's inside. It's just the bag that's distorting my view of it. Does that make any sense as far as that goes? So now, if I go over here to filter and I go to filter gallery again, and when I do, I dial in what I like for the sky and I click OK, look at how it was applied. There's my layer, and usually there'd be nothing underneath it. But since I applied it after converting this into a smart object, we have something here. It says Smart Filters, and there it says Filter Gallery. If I turn off the eyeball on this, if you look over on the edge of my screen, can you see the picture? Turn it off and on. Can you see the picture changing? So I could disable the filter. I can also double click on the name of the filter. It's called Filter Gallery, and it would send me right back in where I could come in here and modify the settings. So that means the settings are not permanent now. I can always modify them. I can turn off the filter by turning off the eyeball. I can change the settings by double clicking over here on where it says Filter Gallery. So let's try something then. I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm just going to type Command J to get another one. It also has the Filter Gallery on it. I'm going to double click on the word Filter Gallery. And I'm going to now look at the bottom of the photo. And I'm going to adjust the settings until I like the bottom. Right now the bottom looks too basic. It doesn't have enough detail. So I'll bring my brush size down, brush size down, brush size down, until the bottom has enough detail. I'll see about if brush detail might help down there as well, either higher or lower. I'm liking it higher. And I'll click OK. So now what I have is two versions of my picture. One that has more basic detail, one that has more fine detail. And then if I want to use both versions, because right now the top version is completely covering up the bottom, I'll add a layer mask. And with my layer mask active, I'll grab my paintbrush tool get a smaller brush that's soft, and I'm just going to paint with black over the sky. And what that is doing is hiding the top one to reveal the bottom one. So if I hide the bottom one, do you see there's a big hole there? So that means that I'm using two different settings on this image now. So that, can you see the bottom part of the photo changing when I turn this eyeball off and on? Therefore, I can use different settings in different areas. And if I want to fine tune it afterwards, I double click on the word filter gallery to get back into the settings. So you can stack up as many of these as you want. You can apply a different filter with different settings on each one and then mask them. But it's really nice when you have a smart object, because then you can double click on the word filter gallery to be able to modify the settings, which I think is nice. And then if you want to see the original, in this case we have so many pieces making it up, what I would have to do is most likely hide the mask and then turn off the filter. And then you zoom up and you can see here is my original. If I turn the filter back on and turn the mask back on, I can see more of the creative end result. I'm going to revert this image though back to the original, and let's try something else with filters. I'm going to convert this into a smart object again. Because I chose revert, it went back to the original. And I'm going to try a different filter. This time the filter I'm going to use is called Find Edges. There's Find Edges. Find Edges tries to look for detail in your picture. And when it finds detail in your picture, it tries to draw black lines around it or just dark lines. If you have lighter detail, you get lighter lines. But I think that's somewhat interesting, but I lost too much of the photo. I can't recognize the photo in that area. Well, here's another feature you'd want to know about then. So here's the filter that's been applied. It was called Find Edges. I could turn it on or off with this, but then I can also do this. Do you see that thing? I'm going to come over there, and if I double click on that, I can tell it a blending mode to use. So imagine it is the same as me duplicating the photo, applying the filter on the duplicate that's sitting above, and then changing its blending mode. So I can try all sorts of things. Let's try darken mode. And now we've got like the equivalent to little lines around our clouds. Or I can come in here and try maybe divide mode. Just experiment with your modes. That one's starting to have an interesting effect. And I'll zoom out a little bit, see what it's doing. I'll turn off my filter. There it's off, there it's on. But the main thing I wanted to share with you there is that there is an extra feature over on the right side. If you double click on this, you can tell it what blending mode should be used to apply this filter, which is unique. One last thing about those is I don't like the bottom of the photo now. I like the clouds, I think they look interesting, but don't like the bottom. Well, this white box that's right here is a mask. And if you paint there, the mask will remove the filtering effect. So if I don't like the filter somewhere, all I got to do is grab my paintbrush and paint with black and say, I don't want it across the bottom of my photo. And do you see the black paint going into that mask? I did have to click on that mask, though, to make it active in the first place. So if I don't like it at the bottom of the photo, I just paint with black to get it off of there. If there's one spot in the sky where I don't like it, I can see if I can get away with getting rid of it. But sometimes when you paint up in the sky, you might be able to tell where you painted, because if the sky gets brighter or darker when the effect is removed, it might be too obvious. But in this case, I think I can. I didn't like it in that one spot there because it was just too obvious, the brightening, and I might not like it in this one spot. But if I was going for more of a creative look, that was giving me a bit more of a creative look in my sky. So it's not that I want you to apply the Find Edges filter in divide mode, which is what I did. I just want you to experiment with filters in general, knowing that you can play a lot more when they're not permanent. And where I can just turn off the eyeball to turn it off and on, I can change the blending mode, and I can paint on a mask. So that's the main thing to get across. This is just, I had to pick a filter and to use, so I happened to pick that one. You can also apply more than one filter to build up an effect, and you'll just get a longer list here of various effects. So I could come over here and let's say I try one called Stylize Emboss. And it's just taking the result of the last filter and filtering it more. There I see a lot of 50% gray, so I might go and double click on the little slider next to the words embossed, you see it over here, and say, I could use one of those blending modes that makes 50% gray go away. So I can use overlay, I can use hard light's stronger, I can experiment. But each one of those filters, they'll just stack up here, can have a different blending mode. The only thing is you only have one mask, and that affects all filters. That's why previously when I wanted the bottom of the photo to have a different photo than filter than the top, I had to duplicate the layer and mask the top one. So anyway, we can build up effects. Then let's show you how you can sometimes make something that you know is not small look small. Well, you know a city is not the size of a table, but we can make a city look like the size of a table or the size of my laptop. How can we do that? Well, if you think about any time you magnify something, let's say you get a microscope. Have you ever looked through a microscope and you had to focus it? If you ever try to focus a microscope, you get the narrowest little depth of field possible. And there's like next to nothing in focus, except for the tiny little slice of whatever it is you're looking at that you happen to be focused on. And anything a tiniest bit closer to you or further away in three-dimensional space is out of focus unless you turn that little focus wheel on your microscope and get that part in focus. So if you have a three-dimensional, let's say a rock under a microscope, you can't see the whole thing in focus. That's just not how microscope delivers its detail. You have to move the focus wheel on that microscope to decide what level of the rock to view. And so in general, your brain is used to that concept, even though you might not be mentally aware of it. You just know that anytime you see a scene where there's 98% of the thing is out of focus and only one little part is in focus, there's a good chance that that's something that's being magnified tremendously, like through a microscope, because that's when your eye sees that. Well, if we take a picture of something that where it's impossible in general to get it out of focus, what happens is the further away something is, the closer when you focus on things, the closer you get to what's known as the infinity point on your lens. And once you're focused at infinity, anything beyond that's in focus. It's just crisp. And whenever you have a scene like this and you're focusing, you're at infinity. Because those things are, if you look at on some lenses, you have a distance scale of how far away you're in focus. It maxes out at a little infinity symbol. And if you focus on something like this, you're there. And it means that everything's in focus. And that's what you're used to seeing when it comes to street scenes of a whole city or something this far away. Well, if we come over here and choose blur, actually blur gallery, there's a choice called tilt shift. And if you go in there to tilt shift, these little bars show up and we can blur parts of our image. If we click on the middle dot, we can move this up or down. I'm going to get it into this little area here. We can also grab these little lines and pull on them. That controls how soft a transition is, how abrupt a transition will be. Because what happens is anything beyond this line that's here is going to get completely blurry, or however blurry I tell it to. And then it will fade in, and once we get to this little section in between these two more solid lines, that's where it's going to be in focus. And we can rotate it too. If you'd like to. So all sorts of things we can do. You get near these little dots, the little dots to rotate. So I can do that. Then in the middle, there's like a big circle. Well, it's not big, but it's bigger than the dot that's in the middle. That's like a little volume knob. And if you grab that and rotate it, you can blur more or you can blur less. And if you come in there and you blur enough where it looks like an out of focus photo, then your brain starts thinking that, well, the only time I see things that have that narrow of a range of focus is when it's something being magnified tremendously. And therefore, your brain can start to think that this is a miniature. If I click OK, it'll take a moment for it to finish. But it can think this looks like a miniature. And because that's when your brain's used to thinking that you get really shallow depth of field is when you're magnifying. And so it can feel like that little thing is small. So it's called tilt shift. It's under the filter, blur gallery, tilt shift. And it works best if you have like a city scene, not where there's, how would I say it? Where you see a lot of stuff, where you'd have to just see a wide expanse of the city, lots of little details. If you see it like a port where you have all little boats and things in it, also can work nice. And if you end up putting it in there, getting a good portion of it blurry, just keeping one area sharp, you can feel more like a miniature or a small version of things. All right, then let's try one other thing. Let's see if we can figure out how to bend a photo. Let's say I have a picture of a mug like this, and I want it to look like my photo is printed on the mug. How the heck do you do that? Well, we got to pick a photo first, and I don't have one pre-picked, so I'll have to go grab one. Why don't we grab one from our, maybe one of our images from the first day. Open it up. And I'm going to drag that over to the other image. Let go of it there. Close the other file that's open. And now before I do anything, I'm going to actually turn this into a smart object. Remember that thing, convert for smart filters? It's not good just for filters. It's good for all sorts of other things. Let's look at one of the things it's good for. Well, if I come over here and choose free transform, and I transform this image to make it smaller, get it about mug sized, like a mug shot. Then another thing that I can do is if I want to bend this to make it look like it's on the mug, I can choose Edit, Transform, Warp. If I choose Warp, then I can move the four corners of this. See how it bends it? And if I think about where would the four corners of this be if they were actually printed on this mug, I'm going to move them to where I think they might be if printed on mug. So right now I'm just looking at an equal distance from the top edge of the mug down here. Same thing at the bottom here. If I can grab that, come on, let me grab. There. Just get it so it's an equal distance from the bottom edge of the mug, and so I need to get this one an equal distance as well. Then you see those handles that come out? Do you see a handle kind of coming out this way? That tells it what direction the edge of the picture is going to go in when it leaves that corner. And right now there's a handle sitting here that is pointed up this way, and that's why the photo is going in that direction. But if I think about what direction it should be going in, it should be going down this way, shouldn't it? So I'm going to grab this and point it down. I'm not looking at the picture, I'm looking at the handle to say it needs to go that way. I'm going to do the same thing. There's another handle coming out of this corner. It's actually pointing up this way. It's kind of hard to see, but it's ending right there. I'm going to grab it, point it down. I'll fine-tune that. Then the edge of the photo shouldn't bulge out like that, right? The reason it's bulging out is this handle and this handle are pointing outward. They should be pointing straight up and down because the edge of the photo should go straight up and down there. So I'm going to grab this one. I'm going to point it straight down. I'm going to grab this one. I'm going to point it straight up. And I'll do the same thing on the other side, making sure they're pointed straight up and straight down. Therefore, it doesn't bend the picture there. And then at the top, I need to adjust those little handles too. Then you can click within this grid. If you click in the middle of the grid, you'll bend the middle of the photo around. And it'll take a little bit of fussing to get it to look the way you want, but you can fine-tune it by clicking within the various portions of the grid. But I think I'm getting somewhat close. I don't know that I'm going to spend the time to get exact, but I'm close. I press return or enter when I'm done, and you see how we have it bent? But you know what's cool? We now can put any photo on that mug. Because remember we turned it into a smart object before we bent it? That means we did the equivalent to taking a photo and putting it in a protective thing, like a Ziploc bag. And whatever I do after it was put in there cannot permanently change the original contents. And so there's a way I can open the bag and slip a different photo in. And when I slip a different photo in, it'll have this effect applied to it still. Interesting, huh? How can I do that? Well, you go to the Layer menu, you choose Smart Objects, and there's a choice in here called Replace Contents. Layer, Smart Objects, Replace Contents. It comes up and it's asking me for a file. So I'm going to find a file. We got this image, although it might not be the same dimensions, nor is that. Just seeing if there is a file that would be the same dimensions, meaning a horizontal picture. That one maybe. I'm going to hit place. This is a RAW file, so to open in Camera Raw, but I click OK. And do you see how now that picture's bent? And I could have done the same thing when we applied filters to the image. I could have gone up to the Layer menu, chose Smart Objects, chose Replace Contents, and fed it a different picture. And it would have opened a different picture, but the effect would have been still applied, which is pretty interesting. Then I could say, in order to print it on the mug, change the blending mode to something like multiply, and we might get more of the shading from the mug where it looks a little bit more like it's there, but I'd have to fine-tune the bending because I can tell this corner's too low and stuff. It just takes time.